a bloody war in the first 10 years, both at the domestic level and as well as there's the Iran-Iraq war. But in the first 10 years, it's clearly obvious that there was a struggle for democracy, for human rights, and for Iran to go in a better direction. And on the other hand, we've seen in the first 10 years a violent onslaught of opposition groups. And we have witnessed, and there are documents that in the first 10 years there were hundreds and thousands of people who were murdered, either in prisons or in struggle to fight the regime. And this is the first phase, and the second phase was it was marked by the coming of power of Rafsanjani, portraying himself as a pragmatic leader, and there was a lot of hopes that Iran could change in the second term, in the second year. And then there was the Gulf War, the first Gulf War that happened. Saddam was removed, so kind of it tipped the balance in Iran and in the region. Iran coming out as the only power after Saddam's. After the first Gulf War that led to the weakening of Saddam's regime. But that also created a vacuum in Iraqi Kurdistan. As you know, our party was staging an armed confrontation against the Iranian regime, and this was the only way to, as Carol was saying, that we did not want to engage in armed struggle, but it was the only way to bring and get the regime to listen to you. And one of the reasons that the regime at that time was willing to sit down with Qasem was because he had the clout, and he was forcing the regime to listen to him, and that was the only reason. So on one hand, it was a waged war against us, and an imposed war, but at the same time, it was a way to get the regime to listen to you, and they did. But again, the intentions weren't what they were supposed to, what Qasem had hoped at that time. So the second phase again was the coming power of the Rafsanjani, and also eventually the reformist in the 1997s. So there were a lot of hopes for people in Iran and outside that the regime could change for better, the regime could be reformed. And this went into the third phase of Iran. In the third phase, we witnessed, and people in Iran realized that the regime is not reformable. We cannot do reform, or you cannot change the nature of this regime by simply changing pawns or figures within the regime. So there has to be meaningful changes, and people were quite frustrated with the reformist movement, and there was always quite a contentions and confrontations between two sides. So we moved into the third phase, where that's when the regime realized that the reformist movement, and there was a lot of opposition to it, so they had to retract and send the reformers back to where they were in the first place. So Ahmadinejad came to power in 2005, and this changed the whole equation. But the events that we're witnessing right now in 2009, following the elections, had to do very much with what has been going on in Iran the last 30 years. As I said, there has always been a will and a desire for meaningful regime change within Iran. And the people of Iran have realized that this regime is not reformable, so it has to be changed. So regime change has always been the main theme of the Iranian opposition groups, including our party, and this is the only way to accommodate the rights of the ethnic groups. This is the only way to respect human rights. This is the only way to coexist with the neighbors peacefully. And the failure of the reformist movement to change the regime internally and to change its behavior failed. So people in the 2009. Following 2009 elections and the allegations of fraud, and it was very clear that people were not accept the results. And so at the beginning, it was mostly the protests were around "Where's my vote?" And things like that. But eventually, as people were giving the time and there was no response from the regime, the clear demands of the people, of the protesters, was revealed, and that was regime change. As we witnessed in the protests, and the slogans that were raised was mostly about death to Khamenei, death to dictator, and this is still going on. And despite a lot of indications that yes, the regime might has been successful in suppressing this movement, but the movement is quite alive, and it just has to wait for the right time and for the right moment. So the Green Movement is not a movement that came out of the election. So Green Movement has been this movement for democracy and freedom has been in Iran and quite alive, and very much alive in the areas dominated by ethnic groups. As I said, our party was quite vigorous and quite outspoken against the atrocities and the treatment of respect for human rights and treatment of ethnic groups. And there were other movements in Iran as well, in countrywide, and as well as in other areas, demanding the same changes. But the Green Movement wasn't just born in 2009. The movement, yes, it changed color into green, but yes, this meaningful demands and desire for change and for democracy and for respect for human rights were quite alive in the last 30 years, and it still it goes on. And there's another aspect of the Green Movement and the kind of the attention that it got. We have to also look back at the international coverage of the event, and in general the international coverage of the events in Central, in general. So what goes on in Tehran, especially since the reformers came in 1990s or even before, gets more coverage than what goes on in other areas of belonging to ethnic groups. For example, there has been a lot of demonstrations in Iranian Kurdistan, very strong demonstrations that we've seen in Iranian Kurdistan, but they do not get the attention due to the security and militarization of the region, and due to lack of international press. In 2005, we had a very very large protest in major cities, in 5-6 cities, that resulted in the death of hundreds of people and imprisonment of many. And even at that time, there was allegations by various Kurdish activists that they were, that they were raped. They were very unpleasant treatments of detainees, and these allegations were made in 2005, but there were really no one to hear these things. And when it was made in 2009 in Iran by a reformist or someone who is one of the leaders of the reformist movement, Karoubi, it got a lot of attention. So what I'm trying to say is that the events and what's happening in the regions belonging to ethnic groups, especially Kurds, because of the heavy military, due to lack of international press and international media, gets little attention. And the events that Carol mentioned, the general strike, it's a civil disobedience to a way to fight the government. Yes, if people protest in regions belonging to ethnic groups, there's most likely that there will be bloodshed, and the crackdown will be much more rigorous than it is in the center because of